So first, to explain the cheesy music. I get quite nervous with talks, and somebody who I thought was my friend gave me that playlist and told me not to listen to it before playing it. So I hope you enjoyed the metal version of Go Go Power Rangers. It's certainly a highlight for me. My name's Jessica. I work for a company called Uni Days. The tagline is that they're a student affinity network, trying to make student experiences better. We're most famous for doing student discounts. And I'm a back-end developer for them, working mostly in .NET, do a few other things as well. But today I'm going to be talking about a practical guide to dashboarding. First of all, what is a dashboard and why should anyone care? We all use dashboards in day-to-day life, from using your Starling or Monzo app to check your bank balance, right the way through to if you've got a Google Nest at home, if you're lucky enough to have something like that. There's one dashboard which I think is probably the best designed dashboard in the world. Did anyone come to my talk last year? OK, no spoilers. My favorite dashboard is a car dashboard. And there's a few reasons for this. First of all, anyone who drives or is a passenger or likes games such as Mario Kart kind of gets to know what a dashboard is straight away in a car. You can sit in a car and understand what's going on. There's nothing too complicated about it. And it's because they've got a very standard layout, they give you the information that you need in the right sort of time frame. Really, I think this is what all of our development dashboards or other dashboards at work should be like. You get into a car, and there's this big circle in the middle. It's your speedometer, telling you how fast or slow you're going. This is something that you need to know in real time, because you need to know if you're breaking the law. You know the consequences of it. If you're going too fast or you're going too slow, you could cause a car accident, which can have severe consequences. You could lose your license, or you could get points. And you know how to react. Going too fast, hit the brake a little bit. So you know how quickly you need to react, how to react, what the consequences of those actions are. And it's very clear. Then we have the next set of symbols, your indicator lights, your fog lights. You don't have to react as fast. You're not going to really kill anyone, hopefully, by not reacting to this. You might confuse a few people on the road if you keep your indicator light on. Or if you drive in Nottingham, just never switch it on at all. The amount of times I've nearly been hit, it's ridiculous. But again, you know, if it's foggy, put your lights on. If it's bright, you're going to blind someone, turn them off. But you know the consequences aren't severe, you know when to react, and you know what to do. And then there's this one. The one that tells you that you're going to spend money you can't afford. You're going to have to take time off work. You might end up having to get a new car. You're going to have to ring your parents again. That's never fun. The check engine light, all the little red lights in the corner. Again, it's going to take a while to react. You have to take the time off work. You have to go to a garage. You have to look under your mattress to see if there's any pennies left. You know what to do. Go get it fixed. Otherwise, the problem's just going to get worse. And probably have a little cry, let's face it. And the thing is, with all of these measurements, and trust me, I've tried, if you put duct tape over any of them and decide not to look at all, your environment's not changing, unfortunately. You're still speeding. You still have to get your car fixed. And if you don't get your car fixed, it's only going to get so much worse when it finally breaks down in the middle of the road. This is why I like car dashboards. It's telling me about my environment in real time. It's giving me the information I need to know what to do and when to do it. In combination, I can get a lot of information. But even better, there's a baseline. So anyone who has used a car can get into it and know what's going on. Why aren't our dashboards like this at work? Why can't I just join a team and kind of know the state of play? So today I am going to talk about suggested baselines for dashboarding. I'm going to do a small demo as well and talk about how we've applied these at the place I work and how they're working for us. Just to clarify, the talk will be more about metrics. I'm not going to talk about diagnostics today. So metrics are high level. They're showing you about the state of your system. They're great for spotting issues. And they're normally kept in present view. If you've got monitors around your workplace, it's normally metrics you'll have on them. if you have your screens on. And then there's diagnostics, which are used more for tracing a problem, going in, finding out what it is, fixing it. These are shorter lived, but used in combination with metrics. You see something's going wrong, you find out what's actually happening. So services. The pattern that I tend to use for services is by a guy called Brendan Gregg. If you haven't come across him, his blog is excellent. And he does some really great talks as well. But he talks about USE. This is mostly used as operational kind of needs, but it applies great for services. And I'm going to go through each letter of this acronym, because we all love acronyms, and kind of explain how to use it. First of all, we have utilization. Sorry for my doodles. This is a great memory aid, and I have a lot of fun with it. So utilization is the time between input and output, to try and put it simply. So in the case of this nice fella here, he's clocking into work, doing something, and clocking out. So your service, something goes in, a process happens, something comes out. Easy peasy, complicated word for something that's relatively easy to measure. And this is great because if the utilization is going up, you know that it's probably doing quite a bit of work, and maybe there's other reasons for that, which is why we also measure saturation. So I was lucky enough to try and do this in Australia a while ago, and trying to explain what a bog was. Turns out that's very much an English thing. So in this case, we have the bat bog, which is very much occupied, and a load of people queuing up to use it. For saturation, it's the degree to which work is queued. This could be a physical queue. It could be something like Rabbit, or it could be other ways in which work's getting into your service. But if you're using these in combination, your utilization might go up, but you might be having quite a clear queue. Maybe you want to look into your service. Likewise, maybe the saturation is really building up, and so is that utilization. And then you've got a real problem. Then you know you need to probably fix it pretty fast. Maybe put up a new instance, do something. Does anybody know who this fella is? Ah, great. Yeah, working with a few interns at the moment, and they don't remember good old Clippy. They don't know the rage. Errors. What it says on the tin. You'll have your main errors, like your service has gone down. That's pretty big. I mean, you don't really need to look at utilization and saturation at that point to be worried. But then you've also got internal errors. Anything that your service is throwing will help you diagnose the problem with your diagnostics. But likewise, used in combination with utilization and saturation, it'll be easier to know where to look. So this is 3 simple things that we use for all of our services, and it avoids a lot of problems. It actually covers most of the problems that we might have. APIs is the biggie. I work a lot with APIs and Lambda these days as well. And there's 2 main patterns which we use in combination. The first is the 4 Golden Signals by Google. They've got a brilliant SRE book. The first edition is very light, and you can get through in a couple of train journeys. The second edition is a tome, really good if you need a way of opening a door, but full of great value. And they talk about traffic, error, latency, and saturation. And just for a bit of extra joy, saturation means a completely different thing in this case, which is great. So first of all, we have traffic. How many times are you being hit within a certain amount of time? It's pretty much what it says on the tin. How many times? Just do a count around your API. If it's going up, we'll see if we can handle it. If it's quite low, well, normally it's fine. But maybe there might be a problem upstream with your services. Again, using those things in combination. Error. Now, this is more interesting with APIs, in my opinion. Because yes, you have the APIs down, and you have your internal errors again that you're throwing. But error is contextual in this case. So yeah, 500, pretty much all an error, right? What about a 404? It depends on what your API is doing. In some case, a not found is a legitimate answer checking a database further downstream, yeah, data might not be there. That's fine. In other cases, that's something you need to know about and react to. So you need to consider KPIs when it comes to errors and APIs, key performance indicators. What your API is being used for, what's the value of it, what you're going to be doing with that information. So unfortunately, APIs involve quite a few conversations. But again, traffic and error. If your traffic's going up and the errors are going up, probably got some issues to do with dealing with that traffic. Latency, the time between request and response. I couldn't come up with a decent everyday kind of drawing for this one. But again, it's something that a lot of developers actually just measure as a standard anyway. Throw it on your dashboard. So the time in which it takes your API to process the work it's doing, maybe it's doing too much again, maybe it's being affected by the amount of traffic, or maybe your errors are showing you something to do with whether latency is having an increase or a decrease. Saturation. Not everybody can do saturation in this case. I'm going to talk through what it is first and then talk about it. So in this case, our glass of water is our API, and our bottle of liquids is the amount of requests we're sending. So you fill up your API until you get to capacity. There was a talk by David and Damien yesterday that talked about the difference between load testing and stress testing for a bit. I don't know if any of you are there. This is very much load testing, so how much your API can cope with rather than at which point does it break. But this would be 100% saturated. And your measurement is to which degree you've reached saturation. So 30% saturation, your API is 30% full of the requests that it can handle. Not everybody can do this because not everybody can load test. It's not always practical. And that's fine, but if you can, it's very useful with the other three. Because again, if your saturation is getting pretty high, it's in combination with your traffic and your latency and your error, it's giving you more indication of what you need to be looking at. Which brings me next to RED. This is a pattern by Tom Wilkie. He does quite a nice talk about it at GrafanaCon last year. I quite like this because the terms are very much what they say on the tin: rate, error, and duration. Rate. We've seen this image before. It's your amount that your API is being hit. There is one difference between Google and Tom Wilkie on this one, in that Google suggests that you measure the ratio between successful and erroring calls to your API. Whereas Tom Wilkie suggests that you just do the count. Personally, I prefer the ratio, and I'll show you why later on. Error, Mr. Clippy again. Still, remembering that context. Is your 404 a bad thing, or is it good? Internal errors as well. And duration is another thing we've already seen, same as your latency. It's the time between your request to your response. So all of these things tend to be something, certainly in the places I've worked, which are measured but not necessarily thrown on a dashboard together. Individually, they're relatively powerful, but in combination, a bit like a transformer, sorry, I'm a complete nerd, they're brilliant. In fact, the RED is the thing that we measure for all of our lambdas currently at uni days. And the amount it's saved us is unbelievable. But back to that car dashboard again. If you're measuring these baselines as a standard across your company, somebody new comes to your team, they can look at your dash and know what's going on instantly. They know the health of it. You can train people outside of your team to know what it means, so they can be wandering past going, whew, that shouldn't be that color. It's great. Though we do also have an over-interested project manager sometimes who I wish we hadn't told them what it meant. But still, just makes us fix things faster, doesn't it? So as I've said, there's a lot of overlap here. I'm going to do a demo, which is very much for kind of playing around with environment. But it does actually apply to our production environment as well. I'll talk through that. We're not going to do saturation because I haven't done many demos, and I have a funny feeling that would go very wrong for me. So I'm keeping it easy. We're just going to do rate, error, and duration. A bit of disclaimer. I am using Katacoda. Has anyone used Katacoda here or heard of it? Oh, a couple of people. Great. The Katacoda is kind of great. And it's this website here. And you can use it to learn about various things, especially in a Docker environment. It hosts your Docker environment for you in a browser, which is fantastic, because I've got a very weak little laptop here that can't run Docker to save its life. The other thing that's nice about this is that I can share the course, and then you can have a play with it afterwards. But highly recommend it. I don't work for them. I don't get any payment out of this. It's just a great tool. So I'll be using Katacoda, which has Docker. I've got a simple API written in .NET Core. And all this does is I send it an integer, and it sends me back the corresponding HTTP code. Very much just for demo purposes. I quite like it. This has statsd. So we call out to statsd, which is our telemetry tool in this case. Anybody use it before? Ah, good. It's one of my favorites. We're using Graphite and Grafana as well. So Graphite has Carbon and Whisper behind it. Whisper is, I'm getting ahead of myself. But sorry, I have lost my focus. There we go. So we've got Carbon and Whisper behind it. So Whisper is a time series store. So that's aggregating our time blocks. Graphite is our querying tool. It does have its own UI as well. I'm not that great at using it. I don't find it that usable. Maybe it's more of my problem than the tools. So we're going to be using Grafana for the UI. Just to give you a quick look at the code itself, because as I said, it's super simple. And it's completely open, so play with it as you will if you do want to play with this stuff. So if I go to the startup, good old Windows, we'll do what I tell it to. Go on. Here we go. So I'm using the Just Eat statsd library, because I quite like what they do with it. Oh, no. Sorry. I have not sacrificed the demo gods this morning. This is my own fault. I hear architects are very effective, so if there's any in the audience. But, sorry. So we have a timer just here. And that's all we're using. Because the amount of times that timer is hit will be my count. And my timer is also going to give me my duration. Lovely. And we're returning the status code, so I'll be able to see my errors and my successes. Right. I'm going to show you a slide because I put some effort into it. So we're going to do a demo. Apologies. OK. So just to show you how to find it, if we go to search on Katacoda, and the handle that I use everywhere is WordShaker. I'm not a Little Mix fan. It's a reference from a book. If you couldn't tell from the playlist when you walked in, apologies again for that. And then we go to the demo of Grafana and Graphite. This just gives you a little start scenario, and we'll jump in. So is anybody familiar with Docker or used it? OK, I will talk through a bit of this then. So we're creating the network, first of all. This is to enable our images to talk to each other. I'm going to try and put this in as simple terms as I can. And then we're going to pull in our Graphite image. So we've got that Graphite, Carbon, and statsd that we saw previously. This is going to quickly pull down. What we've got here is the command, which would be very similar for if you were doing a Docker file or anything, or Docker Compose, whatever. So we're running a detached process. Basically means once Katacoda dies, this will die as well. Lovely. We'll give it the name of Graphite, so it's easy to find. Open the ports that we need. The one thing that I do want to point out with this is, oh, I'm too short. This bit here, the UDP. So by default, these connections are TCP, but statsd suggests you use UDP by default. So you'll have to tell it that. You can use it with TCP, but UDP is better in this case. We are telling it that it's using that monitoring network that we set up. And the final bit is the image that we're pulling down. So that's that pulled down nicely. And then we'll do the same for Grafana. In the background of this, so again, all of this Katacoda code is on my repo. And what it does in the very beginning is it's done a pull of these images. So if I quickly go to course bash, it just does a Docker pull of the images I'm going to need before the course actually starts. Ah, yes. It has never done it this speedily before, even when I've practiced. This is great. I was worried that I was going to have to talk a lot while this was pulling down. We have a port open here of 3000. Again, we've given it a name and told it which network that is going to be on. Nicely, we have a display 3000 up here. So if I click that, opens up my Grafana instance. Now within, less than 5 minutes, we've already got a little demo environment that's running Grafana, Graphite, and StatsD. So this is just the default login. There we go. And what we do is we add our data source. So data sources is where you're going to be pulling your information from to show in Grafana. There's many different options for this. Current workplace, we do pull CloudWatch into Grafana. There's a couple of gotchas on that, which I'll go through. Today, we will be using Graphite. But as you can see, you've got Postgres, you've got Prometheus, you've got various other things. And this isn't the extensive list. There is more. So we'll click on Graphite for this. First of all, the name comes through as default these days. That didn't used to happen, which is good because I can't spell to save my life. So we'll give it the URL for where it's pulling that information from. In this case, it's just HTTP Graphite. Apologies if you lose me for a couple of seconds because typing and speaking, turns out I can't do these things in combination too well. You can tell it where it's getting its access from, so server or browser. Give it whitelisted cookies. There's some basic auth as well. Why you would ever want to skip TLS, I don't know. So if you ever come across a scenario for that, give me a shout because I've never come across that in person. We got basic auth, etc. You can choose your version of Graphite that you're running. I know that this image is actually running 0.9, so stick with that. And save and test. Ah, lovely. So we have our data source. But we currently don't have any information in there. So I'll go back to my Katacoda. And as I mentioned before, we have that API that's available. This is available on Docker Hub. So again, if you just go to WordShaker, told you I can't type and speak at the same time. There we are, Response API. And it's available on Docker Hub to pull down. So I will pull down the Response API. Again, this time it's got the port of 5000. I'm not sure if you can see it at the back. But I'll make this all available after the talk as well, so you can have a bit of a play. And telling it it's on that same network, so it can talk to my other images that I've pulled down. This shouldn't take too long, because it's quite small. Lovely. So my API is running. We need to get some stuff in there. So as I said, we're just going to be throwing it some, a string integer of 200 and 500. This is just using curl because I'm lazy. I'm sorry. It's just the easiest thing to do. So we're just sending it a post with a body of either 500 or 200. And it'll be returning my status code so I can build a dashboard. There's always a little element of risk with doing this as part of the demo, because I've got no idea what these stats are going to look like on the other side. I'm hoping they look sensible. So we'll give that a go. All of what I've talked about is on here as well, so feel free to have a play. We'll go back to Grafana. Up on this side, we've got a little plus, so we just go to create dashboard and graph in this case. I had a bit of fun with this. So I told somebody to make a dashboard without realizing they hadn't really used Grafana before, and they got stuck at this point, because you've got to go up to panel title to give it its information and press edit. Poor person waited like an hour before they actually asked. They were just clicking everything. I felt really sorry for them in the end. So, yeah. Just giving you my life story as I'm talking. So this is our graph. Beautiful. Let's give it some data, because it's got nothing. So our data source is graphite, which we set up earlier. And first of all, I'm going to try and cover rate and error. Oh, I feel like a magician. I want to have like a cape. So, sorry. So this is where I tend to pick the wrong thing. Great. So we've got stats. We go to timers because we had that timer in the code to begin with, and response API because that's the thing we're measuring. With Grafana, you can actually set this up as a JSON template and have it so that you have like response API is something you fill in. Really useful for if you are using this as baselines at work, because you don't have to keep making these graphs over and over again every time you create something. We need to tell it which code it has. I could do 200 for success, but I could also wildcard this, so have a 2-star. That covers all of my success responses. And we want to... Oh, code. Oh, sorry. I didn't spot that. Thank you. Code, telling it what it's measuring, and then do my 2-star. And in this case, we want a count, because we just want the count of the rate, the amount of times we're being hit. So if I zoom out, we do have a tiny little spike over here. I will put this down to the last 15 minutes to make it a bit clearer. Don't worry if you can't see it at the back. I will make this more clear in a second. First thing that we want to do is, because we've got no data previous to this, which means if ever we get a 0, it's not going to appear on our graph, is do a transform null. And that will change any null values to a 0, just giving us a continuous line across. The details coming through, we want to average them, because otherwise we're getting the single points across. So we'll do a sum series, and that will give us our blocks of data. And lastly, that's completely unreadable to anyone who's joining your team. The default legends come through as this kind of query string thing. It gets long. It's not great. One of the gotchas with CloudWatch will come up now, because we can alias this, which means just to give it a name. So in this case, I want my 200 counts. And that will change that. CloudWatch, you can't alias. It's not available yet. So you'll end up with a lot of GUID-looking legends, which is a bit disappointing. But there we go. We've got some spikes. This is great. The next thing we'll do is go to this hamburger, because it saves a load of time and duplicate. And I'm going to be cheeky and just change my 5s on the duplication, my 2s on my duplications to 5s to give me my erroring. Now, this isn't very clear on what it's showing us at the moment. For counts and errors, they're distinct data. So the next thing I will do is go to display. And this is more of a preference thing on my part. But if you go to series overrides, you can tell it to show bars rather than lines. So we'll tell it what we're wanting to affect, set lines to false, bars to true. I just like to do this for distinct data in particular. Oh, sorry, I need to click that. I like to do this for distinct data because it's not a continual kind of source, unlike time. But there's another reason. And that is because, if only there was a drum roll. And if only I was using a proper mouse. This. So personally, I think all errors should be red, because I will look at that. There we go. We've got our ratio. We can now see to which degree there's more errors than there are successes. So if my graph is turning red, that's when I'm panicking. It's great. And it's also when my project manager's tapping me on the shoulder going, stop looking at your screen and look at the blooming graph on the wall. So we've got our Google SRE definition of traffic. We have a count, we have our ratio of error to success. So we have rate and error. What about duration? I'm just going to go through this quickly, and I'm going to cheat and duplicate again. As I say, please do look into templates for this, because it will save you a bunch of time. Now this time, we've got our stats timers response API code, but we don't want a count. We want a mean for our average, because we want the average time. We also need to change these down here. So rather than a sum series, a series of those, well, an average of those sums. We want a average series. And our alias is wrong. So this time, what are we missing out of RED? Duration. So 5xx, duration. And I'll just do the same for 200 very quickly, rather than making you watch me type, because I know that's not amazingly fun. To start, change my alias, and zoom out. So we've got some lines. This isn't perfect yet. We can make it so, though. So we'll go back to our series overrides. I do want these to stay as lines this time, because it is continual information. But I'm going to make the lines a bit thicker. I do this anyway because I'm a bit blind, to be honest. And I want to make the colors match so I know what they're corresponding to. Again, that's a preference thing. I like my bars and my colors of my lines to match. Is that a thick enough line at the back? Do I need to increase it a bit? Yeah, I'll put it up a bit. So if I do a line width of, that'll do. And I'll do the same for my erroring. So far, we've got those baselines showing on this graph for R, E, and D. We'll ignore the Google saturation at the moment. And I'll give this a color of red. Problem is, they're both on the same axes. So the other thing we can do is just add another axis in. So if I put a y-axis of 2 on the ones at a time, sorry, I always do when I'm typing. Now we have milliseconds up one side. So it's easy to see which ones are time and which ones count. Just to make it even clearer, if you go to the axes tab, you can actually give it a unit. So in this case, we want time of milliseconds on our y-axis too. You can give it labels as well if you want. And one thing I would suggest is using the y minimum on here. So if you set both to 0, you know that your count and your time are both starting at the same point. This is great for comparison, especially as I've tried to emphasize as much as I can. Comparison is really powerful in the case of these three things. Luckily, I've kind of won out on my bit of curling earlier, because it's actually showing something that's quite useful. So this big spike that we've got at the beginning, that's my API warming up. Worth knowing if you're using something like lambdas that don't get hit very often is that you'll see regular ones of those spikes, because it takes a little while for them to ready themselves for work. So you know when not to panic when you see that spike. Errors doesn't have that degree. We have our ratio, as I mentioned. This would be something that I'd probably want to look into, because it's more red than I'd be comfortable with. But as I say, in combination, you can use these things to see what's going on with the graphs. So have a play. I hope that was useful to some degree. If you could give me some feedback on this, it would be great, because I got told to do a demo last time I did this talk. So this was the first run of trying one. But I want to talk about how this actually applies in a production environment. So at my workplace, we use AWS. And this is kind of what we've got going, which is very similar to that demo setup. We have ECS, which is hosting our Docker. It's the same graphite image, which has got Carbon and Whisper and StatsD. And we've got Grafana for our UI. There's a few bits with the setup of this, so you have to tell it about its port mappings. Again, it's much like that command that we saw earlier with how it can access its information, etc., including its Postgres endpoint. And you have to give it an address, much like we had 3000 earlier on. The bit that's a bit different is we use EFS for storing data that we need to remain longer than the life of the container. It is EFS in this case. You can use various other things. This is a legacy decision. Sorry, I saw my other half questioning that. But I checked my sources. So, I mean, personally, I would use something like S3 because it's just, it can be text files, it can be JSON, like, it depends what you got. But our statsd and Whisper config is set in EFS. It was set up about 4 years ago. I mean, because we need our data to remain outside a container. I've seen it happen before where people have got their data in the container, drop the container, bye-bye data. I really feel sorry for my friend that happened to. So yeah, keep your data outside your container. The other weird decision, before I get that look again, is that we have our Grafana config in Postgres. I have no idea why. Again, just use S3, it's cheaper. I think somebody got a bit excited about new technologies, if we're honest. But this is actually what we have running, and it's really similar to that demo that I just showed you. The only difference is that we were using Katacoda rather than ECS, and our config was just in our commands. Does it help me in real life? So I've been in a lucky situation where I haven't had that many errors recently. But we do have dashboards constantly on the wall at the moment at my workplace. And nicely, we had a problem recently where both the API RED and USE work together beautifully to show us a problem. So as I mentioned, we use a lot of lambdas. And this was a bit worrying. I've had to anonymize this because my boss would kill me. But yeah, our errors were kind of increasing. We're getting about 13 errors here. There's a lot of red going on. Further upstream, there's even more errors at 78. The invocations is actually kind of what we were expecting. We're normally around the 95 to 100,000 marks on this particular lambda. But we needed to find out what the hell was going on. We've got a rate error in duration, but this wasn't really making sense. So we went a bit further downstream to our CloudWatch metrics. And it's this one here, the equivalent of utilization in this case, no, saturation in this case. Our Kinesis queue had a massive spike. It self-recovered, so we didn't actually have to do much work here. But what it actually turned out was because of the way we'd written our Lambda, we had a cached error that was just going round and round and round. Kinesis kept picking it up, which was increasing the time on our API, increasing the errors. And then Kinesis went, oh, I don't need you anymore, and fixed itself. But we've now rewritten the Lambda so that doesn't happen anymore. But it would have taken us ages to find that. Luckily, we had a couple of dashboards. And you can click through the levels to see what's going on. So as I say, oh, sorry. Really helpful in real life. It's probably saved us thousands of pounds by now. So a lot of this I've learned through a lot of reading and watching videos. A lot of it I've learned from coming to things like NDC. So I would like to hear about if you have other suggestions for baselines. Again, I encourage you to use them because we use these baselines across teams, which means I've worked in about 8 different teams this year. And I've known what's going on, and it's not been a problem. It's really easy to train people. It's really easy to teach people about how to do diagnostics based on metrics. And it'll save you a lot of money overall. And where can you learn more? So I will be posting all of my slides, resources, and Katacoda, and all the things I've shown you today on my notice page. I do encourage you to adapt and play. Like, all of this stuff is open source. Apologies for any spelling mistakes in the Katacoda thing. I'm terrible with spelling. But I very much encourage you to have a go yourself and have a go in a production environment. These are some amazing resources. So as I mentioned, Tom Wilkie and Brendan Gregg, if ever I meet them in person, I'll probably just be like a big fangirl. But their resources are awesome. Brendan Gregg's blog is extensive but incredibly useful. Tom Wilkie has his videos from last year because he started talking about this after I did my first talk on it. You've got your practical monitoring book, which is a great starter for 10, covers all sorts of monitoring. Today I've talked mostly about back end because that's where I live. But you can do the same sort of thing for front end, security, DevOps, if I'm going to use that word. As I mentioned, you can pair your development dashboards and your operational dashboards on the same UI with both your services using USC and then any of your infrastructure using similar patterns. Awesome. In fact, on that note, I did say I'd mention a couple of CloudWatch gotchas. There's one nice thing about AWS in particular with CloudWatch is that it actually covers your utilization, saturation, and error by default, apart from with databases. So if you're using something like Redis, which is where we found this, you need to set up your own metrics. But that's fine. Everything else is done by default. And you can pull it through. You can even have it on the same dashboard. As I showed you, your services information can fit on one graph if you want. You could have the entire domain for which you're responsible for on one big screen, or maybe you want your APIs at the top, services, and whatever infrastructure on one page, so you can do comparisons across and see what's going on. I occasionally blog. That's mostly talking about things that have gone wrong at my workplace, but also talking about different types of dashboarding. So I talk about MI and BI as well in combination with dev, because it's not just technology dashboards that are important. Your business ones link to this as well. As mentioned with the errors for APIs, you kind of need to know about the business situation for what you're making. At the end of the day, as much as we want to be making things in the nicest way as possible, we're making things for people. And people are the most complicated part of our work most of the time. Learn from each other. NDC is surrounded by awesome people working for awesome companies. I'm going to say awesome one more time. This is a terrible picture of Dylan. He hates me for this, so I'm keeping it forever. But talk to each other. Find out from each other's experiences. I've only been in this industry 3.5 years, and I've learned more from the people around me and Twitter, sadly, than I have from any book or any video. And on that note, because it wasn't mentioned previously, the Pac-Man rule. Anyone familiar with this? Ah, great. This is new to everyone. Oh, one. Damn, sorry. So I've seen a lot of this actually yesterday, sadly. If you're talking to each other, don't stand in a closed circle. Stand in a Pac-Man, because there's always some lonely soul who's a bit awkward, like myself, who can then just join in, and then you can open up and meet more people. Not everybody is here with friends, and you're going to learn from people you don't know more than the people you see every day. So try and stand in a bit of a Pac-Man, make some new friends. And finally, I know I've rushed through this. It's a nerves thing. I speak very quickly. I'm running a conference with my partner here, Morten. It's called DDD. It's being hosted in the UK. Are you all from the UK, or are some of you from elsewhere? OK. So this is going to be in Nottingham this year. I want to bring it up because it's completely anonymous in terms of submission. All we see is your titles and your talk description. Attendees get to vote on what they see. It's completely free. So CFP, or Call for Papers, is currently open. Please apply. You can talk about anything. IoT, Node, .NET, management, design. Our industry is too vast. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But you've got 2 months. Please apply to speak. We'd love to have you. Or volunteer. That's great too. Or just come along. As I said, tickets are free. It's going to be in October. It's going to be great. There's probably going to be talks about monitoring because I love it and people know that. Please do, because it's going to be our first event and we're really excited for it. Thank you for listening. I've tried to leave time for questions as well as just being nervous and talking too fast. So if anybody does have any questions, that'd be great. Ooh, thank you.
On your graph, where you have like all the errors?
Yep. The work one or the other one?
The later one. Your spike was 43 milliseconds. That doesn't sound so much.
You have good eyes.
Yeah, I think it's the next one.
Oh, okay.
So it's always,
Yes, it is.
It's always 0, and then suddenly 43 milliseconds.
That's actually minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, much of a bigger problem. So we've got these scales to actually auto-scale. It doesn't hit a limit. And because we haven't had any problems, really, we don't have any thresholds. So these are quite new lambdas. Normally, we would have like a threshold line of going, well, you're going to get pinged at 3 o'clock in the morning, once they're kind of more stable. Yeah, 42 minutes is not amazing.
Just put that in context. I work at Just Eat, and sometimes 43 milliseconds difference in response time on an API, when you've got hundreds of thousands of hits a minute, can make a massive difference. The one thing you haven't mentioned is you can set up counters which you can then use to get page conversion. So
yeah.
a number of people go on to another page. Management love that, right? But it gives us a very quick metric, right? If people are not going through to the next page and that drops by a small number, you then go, shit, what's going on? And you look at dependencies, and that kind of spike, even if it's 43 milliseconds, can explain a hell of a lot of business data.
Especially when you're doing sales and stuff. I mean, uni days, that has a massive effect because students have no patience, it turns out.
And one tip is when you're building the queries in Grafana, you didn't do toggle edit mode. Toggle edit mode allows you to actually copy and paste the query string.
True.
So you can copy and paste into Slack and say, Bob, look at this, and he can paste it in.
You can actually do a plugin from Grafana to Slack as well. So it can just ping up your graph and then you can click through to it. So I'll just show you like a little image of it and click through. Yeah, the query string is quite an interesting one because depending on your querying language, that can look pretty insane. So I used to do a lot of Cabana as well. I prefer GraphPy these days because especially when you're teaching someone, it's not fun. It's kind of Lucene based. The other thing I didn't mention is the actual dashboards that we use at my workplace. We've got quite a large system. We use microservices because everybody loves a buzzword. So you will have quite a few dashes. What we do is we only have the ones that we're currently working on kind of on the screen, and the rest are set up with errors, etc. This is because we go by the theory that if you're working on it, it's less stable. If you're having a stability problem and you haven't touched it for a month, then you've got a whole other world of problems. But yeah, that limits kind of the number of things that are on display at time. And it also stops the fatigue, because if you've got the same graphs kind of going around, you'll just ignore them, which is what ends up with people not having anything on the screens at all. With erroring as well, please don't alert on everything. Just, oh, you laugh, but this happened at my last workplace. Yeah, only error on the things that you actually have a response to. And if you do need it, you can have actually logs with your errors now, like we use Slack a lot. So you can have it so an error comes up and a little block of text saying how to respond to it, which is quite nice, or a link to documentation. Do you use Grafana at your workplace?
7 years of being on call, make sure you only alert on the things that have to be alerted. There's nothing worse than, like you say, having a call at 3, 4 in the morning, waking you up again and again and again, and it's just some about us page or something that's giving you 4 and 4, and it's like, that's what we call tier 3. It's not tier 1, so it's just.
There is an alerting tab in Grafana as well. So we use PagerDuty for our alerts at my current workplace. But it's kind of linked off the back of this. Because you've got your stable environment and you know what is normal and what's not, it's a really good way of going, OK, so this is about the time range where I want to alert, or this is the count that's really weird, and adjust it from where you can actually see your metrics. It sounds simple, it sounds daft, but it's amazing how much that saved me time. Yeah. I don't think I'm allowed to show mine. Yeah.
Sorry, you mentioned that graph was from the brand new service stage. For all the services you have lines saying that, like critical or something or form or whatever. Do those lines, are they the same as the PagerDuty metrics?
Okay.
Or do we have different ones?
So the question was there for the more stable and older graphs, whether the lines for our thresholds on our graphs are the same as our PagerDuty alerts. Very much dependent on team. Some people don't like having thresholds on their graphs because they find it a bit too noisy. With our team, we do have them matching. We've got a couple of junior people who are still learning a lot about the environment as well and the domain. So it's kind of more for their benefit than it is for the rest of us because they're not getting woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning. We are. So it's just to show them that if they're having an effect on a service and are doing work on it, just to make sure that it's still under that threshold so that we're not getting alerted just because they've made a change and the performance has gone down, etc. Very much team context dependent.
Do you meter and alert on business KPIs?
Ooh, do we meter and alert on business KPIs? Yes. And part of that is because of the duration we talked about with APIs. All of ours meet up with SLAs, so service level agreements, which means if we're going over that duration, we're costing the company a lot of money. We've certainly had it where in previous companies where we've actually lost partners because we weren't measuring that duration and we didn't realize end to end how long a call was taking. Again, you can have a nice little graph going through your services and APIs and doing that math for you, which is incredibly useful. But yeah, so we try to align what we're measuring kind of back to KPIs. So doing throughput of customers, if you're doing an application form, like how many people will get through dependent on change. We do a lot of A/B testing and match the metrics up to those to see whether performance is having an effect, so duration is having an effect, or whether erroring calls, well, they normally have an effect, but sometimes they're quite silent. So you can also use that to prioritize how bad a bug is, for example. If you've got quite a high erroring rate, but it's not really having an effect on your customers, you don't need to jump on it straight away, just soon. So yeah, definitely having a kind of match up with that and alerting against KPIs, kind of, you're already doing it by alerting against your dev work. Anyone else, or should I let you go to your next session? Cool. Well, if you want to come up and ask anything, feel free. We'll be here for a bit. I've got stickers of my goofy little gecko and cards about DDD if you want any more information. Thank you for being lovely. Sorry for speaking as fast as a chipmunk. And I hope to see you around the conference. Thank you.